Assistance briefing. We'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. Two formats for participation, the Zoom web app, as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. Please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we are not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. During the meeting, all participants on Zoom, except for committee members and staff, will be placed on mute by the host. That means you will not be able to mute or unmute your lines manually, but after each agenda item, the chair will announce public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, please click on the raise hand button. If you're on Zoom, this will signal to the host that you would like to provide a public comment and you'll be added to the list. If you're on Zoom on your smartphone, please tap the raise hand button on the bottom of the screen. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 on your keypad to signal you would like to comment. Your name will be called when it's your turn. The host will unmute your line automatically. So please adhere to the speaker time limit. Please treat others with courtesy and respect. Rules prohibiting the use of signs, posters are in effect. And any violation of these rules can result in your mic being muted. So with that, we can go ahead. I think we can get started. I think we have most of the board assistants on. I'm doing a quick count. All right, so the first item on our agenda is the agenda for next Friday's board meeting on November 6th. So looking at the agenda for next week, we'll start as usual at the end for the public hearings. We only have one public hearing, page 8 of the agenda, Rule 1178. Mike, do you want to give a summary of that?
Certainly, thank you. Good morning. So Rule 1178 regulates VOC emissions from petroleum storage tanks. And we're going to be addressing a specific safety issue. This amendment shouldn't be confused with a future broader amendment that will address concerns with petroleum storage tanks as part of the AB 617 program. So in particular, the safety issue in 2019, it was brought to our attention that there were 2 wastewater tanks that had exceeded the 3 PSI limit in the rule. And by rule, they would be required to put on a dome on those 2 tanks. But we subsequently found out that the safety issue is that if you were to put a dome on a wastewater tank, iron sulfide could form on that tank, and iron sulfide is pyrophoric, meaning that it can self-ignite. So obviously we don't want that situation. And what we're going to be proposing in the rule is that we allow the facility to instead take a permit condition that will limit the pressure, the vapor pressure in those tanks below 3 PSI. This will be only available to these wastewater storage tanks where this safety condition exists. By doing so, we'll be foregoing about 2.5 pounds per day of VOC emissions, which is a very small amount, in particular in comparison to what might happen if there was a fire at one of these tanks. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Questions for Mr. Morris?
How many tanks are we talking about?
At this time, there are only 2 tanks.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, moving back to page 2 of the governing board meeting agenda. First item is minutes. There's several set hearings, 4 to be exact. So we'll just briefly talk about each one. Again, these are setting hearings. They are not adoption hearings. So the first one is 1146. So Susan, are you handling that, or who's on the line?
Oh,
Mike.
Okay. So 1146, we're removing an ammonia slip limit That limit is also incorporated in our backed requirement. So when somebody installs SCR and they're subject to new source review, when we review it in the permit for new source review, we do limit the ammonia emissions to 5 ppm. So it's somewhat of a duplicative requirement in 1146, and we've worked with the stakeholders and decided to remove it from 1146, and it would be analyzed in the permit review process through New Source Review Reg 13. So very surgical amendment. Any
And
questions?
just to add on, Susan, also remember we're retaining the demonstration for compliance for those limits. So we're keeping that in the rule. So they would still be required to go through source testing or SEMS to demonstrate that they're meeting the ammonia limit.
Any questions for Susan or Mike? All right, seeing none, our second public hearing is the ozone plan for Coachella Valley. I think many of you knew this was, I've seen this coming. We've talked to the board about it before. Just brief, this is just the adoption of that plan for Coachella Valley. We bumped the area up to extreme. It gives us a little more time, but as part of that, we have to update the SIP. So this is that SIP. It's undergone the public process. We are on track actually to attain out there by this new deadline. Happy to answer any questions.
By the new deadline or actually before, like we're almost there anyway?
I mean, I think our modeling shows we might get there 1 year early, but you know, given all the uncertainties in weather conditions and all that, we know we're going to get a lot of emission reductions that are going to help, but just one off year could be a problem. So we just want to retain maximum flexibility and not set an earlier deadline. Any other questions? Okay, the next item is related, very closely related to the bump up to extreme and that SIP. Susan, you want to talk about the amendments for Coachella Valley?
Sure. So we'll be amending Regulation 13, New Source Review Reg 20 for reclaim for the New Source Review provisions that are in reclaim, and Reg 30, which is our Title V permits. So there are thresholds in there that are associated with attainment status of the different regions. And so for Coachella Valley, because we're changing the attainment status from extreme or from severe to extreme, we'll need to change the federal thresholds for what's referred to as a major polluting facility and for major modifications. And we're changing the limits for VOC and NOx because those are the precursors for ozone. And the issue is the 1997 8-hour ozone standard. So the impacts to this is relatively minor. There's 2 facilities that could be affected in Coachella Valley. Staff has been in communication with these 2 facilities, and they will probably take permit limits so they would not be affected by these lowering of the thresholds.
Any questions for Susan on that? All right, moving on. Another SIP amendment. Sarah, why don't you take the PM 2.5 plan?
Great. Morning, everybody. So yeah, this is our plan to attain the 2006 PM 2.5 standard, the 24-hour standard. In September of this year, EPA issued their proposed determination that we had failed to attain that standard based on the last 3 years of data. The reason we failed to attain is we had high data points in Compton and also in Mira Loma. So this is our plan as to how we are going to get back into attainment. Now we have a chance of being in attainment by the end of this year. So if the case that happens, we go down the clean data determination routes, and this plan is all for naught, but we have to have this plan ready in case that doesn't happen. And so this is our plan to be able to attain. For Compton, the high data points really were flukes. There were maybe 3 high data points in 2017 that put it over the edge. We haven't seen those data points or those high levels before or since. So, you know, we're really kind of chalking that add up to some fluky data, and it's not real. Miraloma has been historically the high design value site for PM 2.5 in the basin. And so we're designing our strategy around Miraloma. Right now, our modeling shows that existing rules on the books, as well as future adopted rules, will get us into attainment, so we don't have to do anything extra. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Is the Miraloma one the one that's the near road monitor?
No, sorry, go ahead, sir.
No, go ahead, Phil.
No, this is the traditional, the one in Miraloma that's been there for a long time is still the driver for the 24-hour standard.
Right.
There is a nearby site that is a near road site. We're seeing the impact of that being more on the annual standard than on the 24-hour standard for whatever reason.
And Miraloma has been the historic design value site since mid-2000s.
Right. Are you seeing a lot of variance from the Miraloma versus the near road?
On the daily, it's still the site that's been there longer, the non-near road site that's still driving things. We're not getting as many exceedances at the near road site, again, for whatever reason. On the annual, the near road site is, it's on the order of like 0.5 to 1 micrograms per cubic meter higher on average. So we do have to make sure that comes into attainment as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Sarah? All right, we'll move on. And Matt, you have at least the next two items, 3 and 4.
Yep. So good morning, Matt Miyasato here. So the first item on the consent is to reimburse the Energy Commission for some funds. So what occurred is the Energy Commission conducted an audit for 5 grants dating back to 2013. It totaled over $12.5 million. AQMD actually put in $3.5 million of our own funds. During the audit, they found 2 observations, one of which was unsupported claims for expenditures for 3 contractors. And the second observation was untimely payment, which resulted in accrued interest. The staff went back and we worked with those contractors. They did admit that they made an error in supporting the invoices to us. And so they are essentially paying back the funds that they were paid by the Energy Commission. There's one company that is going to go bankrupt. And so we are going to front the funds to the Energy Commission and to the tune of about $70.6 thousand. And the other 2 are paying back those funds. The second item on interest earned, the Energy Commission actually asked us back in 2014 to receive funds in total. They typically don't give us a grant as a lump sum for hydrogen infrastructure. We received those funds. We are tracking those funds. The project is still ongoing. It accrued interest during that time, but yet they still found as an observation that we didn't pay the funds out fast enough and accrued interest. Because they never do this, they never give us a grant up front. And the reason they did that was to prevent it from going back to the state. There was no contractual language on what to do with the interest. And so we are simply providing the interest back to them, which we were going to do as we do with all of our projects. So this is essentially cleaning up a bunch of the accounting, as well as dealing with the unsupported expenditures. We did implement tighter project management controls to ensure that this doesn't happen again in the future. And so we are continuing to be vigilant in how we proceed with further contracts. I'd be happy to answer any questions in that regard.
Matt, just one quick question. So the one contractor that said that the district is only going to be out that 70. So we're not going to recoup that. And where I assume we're not doing any more business, or we got what we could get out of them, and that's kind of done.
Yeah, it's a one-man operation. They do hydrogen infrastructure retrofitting. Our legal has looked into that, and it's really a case on whether it's worth the effort to go after him for that 70,000. Our understanding is his financial condition is fairly dire. So we will continue to monitor to see how we might recoup those funds. But right now, what we want to do is to ensure that we take care of the Energy Commission concerns first.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
Um,
questions for Matt on that? Okay, go ahead, Matt. You have the next one.
The next item is to amend a contract for Volvo Lights project. So as you may recall, we have this fairly large project with Volvo to deploy Class 8 electric, battery electric, heavy duty trucks for goods movement. As part of the grant that we received from ARB, it was to also install solar charging at the various infrastructure at their various locations. It turns out due to the COVID crisis, the cost for solar panels has increased just because of the time and the difficulties with contractors getting the solar panels on site. So the costs have gone up. And what we've been approved by ARB is to move some of our admin costs, our administrative costs, over to support the project. We don't believe this is going to impact our admin coverage at all. We typically have an excess. So this is simply moving funds within the budget to cover the solar installation. So it's no financial impact. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that. And then the final item is releasing a solicitation for the final round of Proposition 1B for goods movement for heavy duty trucks. We do have funds that are left over for Prop 1B due to fall through. And what we're going to do is go out with a solicitation and request a brand new list of applicants to support the remainder of the Proposition 1B funds. We're also going to ask for reimbursement for administrative costs, and then also allow the executive officer to redistribute funds as necessary to ensure that we meet all of the various liquidation deadlines that we have upcoming. So I'd be happy to answer questions on that. So this is simply releasing the solicitation to get applications.
Okay, seeing no questions, Sujata, you have the next item.
Yes, thanks, Phil. Good morning. This item is, so we received the third rounding of the AB 617 implementation funds in June. And now we are requesting to appropriate 1.7 million of these funds for contracts, capital outlays, and services and supplies, and to authorize the executive officer to execute those contracts or purchase orders for purchasing those items. Happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any idea when the next round of funding is going to be expected for AB 617?
Typically, I think we do the grant documents around March. And so what we have seen in the past that they fund it around June. So if that is the timeline, then we should expect by next June.
Okay, and obviously the request is going to go up because we're recommending we add another community.
My understanding is really at the last minute, the legislature allocated the same amount as they allocated last year, 50 million statewide. So then it becomes a discussion amongst the districts and CARB and CAPCOA to try to divvy that up. Obviously, we added a community and we need more, but
Right.
It's not always an easy discussion. We'll try to at least hold the line.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Sujata on that? Then Matt, you have the MSRC item. You still there, or Naveen?
So this is Naveen, I can cover that. The MSRC approved issuance of 2 RFPs for near zero and zero emission off-road as well as on-road equipment, focusing on Riverside and San Bernardino areas. So that's the main item that was approved for release of RFPs. And then there were some routine items such as approval of some funds for the city of Santa Monica for some electric vehicle charging and such, but I can certainly get into any of the details should anybody have any questions.
Questions for Naveen?
Just one quick question. I'm sorry I'm asking all these questions, but it's specific for Riverside and San Bernardino County. if there's vendors that are actually outside of those two jurisdictions, but they're supplying the equipment for those two areas, is that just what they have to do, is prove that the trucks or the off-road vehicle equipment or whatever is going to be used in those jurisdictions? Is that kind of how this is going to work, or do they need to be based in the two counties?
So the focus is really on warehousing, and since majority of the warehousing is in that area, they're looking at that Inland Empire or Riverside and San Bernardino counties, but a majority of those transfers take place with our local port communities and elsewhere as well. So certainly that benefit will be larger than just in those communities where warehousing and distribution centers are located typically.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, Wayne, did you want to comment on the calendar for next year?
Thanks, Phil. So as far as the calendar, we certainly heard from Vice Chair Benoit about the new desire to have cement crushing asphalt. So we're going to be working on that. We're also looking at some of the mobile fueling on demand. But as far as the calendar, I think everybody's had a chance to look at it. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, we're going to be dark in July again next year? That's a proposal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And then January, we're going back 1 week just to accommodate the New Year's holiday.
Any questions on that? All right, on to page 6, we have items 9 through 15, which are reports. Any questions? Seeing none. On to page 7, we have the committee reports through 17 through 23. Any questions on that? Seeing none. Jill, you want to talk a little bit about most recent budget and economic outlook?
Yes, and we're going to trail this presentation so we can close the month and provide statistics for up to the end of October. Not a whole lot of change to report. Things are looking about the same, but this presentation will come either Tuesday or Wednesday, the latest, to the board and to all of you.
Questions for Jill? All right, so seeing none, the last item we have is basically an informational item. Just going to have staff update the board on sort of the air quality challenges we've had this year. You're all familiar with some of the really high ozone levels that we've seen, especially early in the season and late in the season. Also the impacts of the wildfires on PM and ozone potentially. And then, there's also some of the COVID uncertainty with the emission changes that COVID orders may have brought about. It's a very complicated picture, but we just want to give everyone a sense of what the air quality was like over the summer. It was not good. That's the conclusion. Any questions? I'm happy to go in a little more detail if you'd like.
I like the slides. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation. It looked pretty thorough, so.
All right, our staff's been really hard at work. I mean, we're just presenting sort of the data results here, but the underlying sort of forensics of what actually happened is going to take a long time. There's a lot of unusual conditions, and it's not just us. Researchers around the country have been looking at this year and air quality and trying to parse it all out.
Are we the only area in the country? I mean, through the colleagues through EPA, are they seeing spikes as well, or is it just localized?
Well, the West Coast for sure, due to the fires, saw elevated PM and ozone for a lot of these days in September, October, November, and then well, not November yet, but I hope not November, but also the heat wave, especially that one in September, and there was some hot days in July that also led to some high ozone levels across the West. So again, it's going to take some time to parse all that out, but it was not the Western United States did not have a good year for air quality. We still have evidence that emissions are dropping. Any other questions on that? Okay, so that concludes the first item on our agenda today. We'll go ahead and see if there's any public comment. I see no hands up. Is that right, Ron?
Correct.
All right, any other business that any of the members would like to bring up?
Hey, Bay, expecting a large closed session, long closed session?
Not yet, knocking on wood, but
Right.
we'll see.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, we'll go back to public comment on anything that was not on the agenda. Looking at the attendee list, seeing no hands, going once, going twice. All right, with that, thank you, everyone. We'll adjourn the meeting and see everybody next Friday.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.